Welcome everyone, my name is Dub and I enjoy collecting games for the original Xbox as a hobby. Today I'd like to showcase a game that maybe you haven't played before, or at least haven't played in a long time. This is Ultimate Spider-Man. Developed by Treyarch and published by Activision, Ultimate Spider-Man is an open-world superhero game with an amazing cel-shaded art style and fun web-swinging gameplay. It is based on the Ultimate Spider-Man line of comics, with actual writing and illustrations by Brian Michael Bendis and Mark Bagley. Before ending up as one of the primary development studios for the Call of Duty franchise, Treyarch was pretty well known for various Spider-Man titles, and they had laid the groundwork for a great Spider-Man game with the release of Spider-Man 2 in 2004. And this game follows the same formula as before. Ultimate Spider-Man had releases on the GameCube, PlayStation 2, and the Xbox, along with a PC port. Additionally, there was a limited edition version of the game released on the PS2, sporting its own unique artwork and a making-of documentary. While this video won't be a deep dive into the game's development history, I would like to share the actual contents of the game in case you're interested in grabbing it yourself. My dad gave me this game a while back because he knew I'd like the art style, and just looking at the box, the game really stands out. You can immediately tell this game wants to look like no other, and I really appreciate the art done on the cover here. It can really pass as its own comic book cover. And the disc looks like it came from Hastings. That's a throwback in itself. The manual's pretty short, got about exactly what you'd expect in it, and there's a little ad for X-Men Legends 2. I'll have to talk about that game later. Anyways, let's get this game booted up in the old Xbox. The game starts out with cutscenes to explain some off-screen events of the story. The plot is primarily focused around Peter Parker and Eddie Brock Jr., two childhood friends whose fathers work together to create the symbiote suit. And in case you're wondering, that goop is the suit. I'll be honest, I'm not a Spider-Man comic expert at all, so please take parts of my plot recap with a grain of salt. Either way, this setup and opening prologue really is pretty fun. The tutorial begins after Eddie has taken the suit for himself and transformed into Venom, leading you to a brief fight with him on the high school football field. The controls are simple with just two buttons for punching and kicking. You'll also see the Spidey sense effect on your head, indicating an incoming attack. The game has its own QuickTime events too. These require you to mash the left and right triggers to balance this meter. Some punching and button mashing later, the tutorial will then continue with a slightly abrupt time skip, transitioning to teaching you the basics of movement and traversal throughout the open city. Throughout the entire beginning of the game, I was consistently intrigued by the cutscenes. It's very easy to describe this game as the comic book game.
I just have to finish stitching up a hole in the butt and then I'll give it back to you.
I can explain the hole in the butt, by the way.
Please don't.
The cel-shaded type graphics and choreography of the cutscenes are very unique for a 2005 title. Ultimate Spider-Man was actually nominated for Outstanding Achievement in Art Direction in the 2006 DICE Awards. The art style of the game had immediately hooked me from the start, and playing the game it easily feels like one I'd play alongside my other games when I was younger. The tutorial doesn't feel too ham-fisted either. There are some frequent loading screens and pop-ups, but it gets you acquainted with things very quickly. Plus the game is pretty self-aware in its nonsense at this point.
It's me, the amazing jumping man, the spectacular leaping dude. It's the sensational talking to myself guy.
Web swinging controls are essential to any Spider-Man game, and this game, like many others, makes casually swinging around New York very fun. There are extra controls for boosting your speed and actually climbing up the web, but I admittedly did not use these at all. Yeah, this is a glitch. I have no idea how to explain it. I'm pretty certain I was trying to climb up, and just mid-backflip, Pete decided to float mid-air, and, well, air his grievances with the world.
I used to get my butt kicked and people called me names. Oh, and the wedgies. The glorious super wedgies. Good times.
There was one other glitch that had completely soft-locked me at one point. During this chase sequence later on, this guy had gotten himself stuck under the level. He was supposed to put up this barrier to block me off, but for some reason that didn't happen, and he ended up stuck here, leaving me with no other option than to intentionally fail to reset the whole thing. This was the only time that I consulted a guide for completing the story as well, because I had no idea if I was doing something out of order or not. Aside from these two incidents, playing the rest of the game was pretty smooth. There are delays in rendering the city in the distance at times, but nothing real noteworthy.
You done with my butt, hole yet?
Following the web-swinging introduction and a few more combat lessons, you meet the Human Torch from the Fantastic Four, who is actually one of several cameo characters. He's here to introduce you to the game's numerous race events in the city. These time trials were one of the biggest annoyances for me personally. Like I said before, the web swinging does feel fun, when done casually. So many times when I have to swing in a very precise way, I feel like I'm fighting with the controls. And these issues are not only apparent in the time trials, there are several levels that require you to chase down a villain through the city, and I was either wrestling with trying to get to where I was needing to go, or I was getting disoriented and confused about where I was and where my target was. The game opens up at this point though, giving you the freedom to begin exploring New York however you want. Progressing the story from this point onward will now require you to complete a certain number of events, including the previously mentioned time trials. But there are also random city events to complete, and later on you'll do combat tours, which will make you fight thugs scattered at various points in the streets. Beginning the next mission of the game will give you your first taste of playing as Venom. I was pretty surprised on my first playthrough when I was given control of it. To be completely honest, Venom brought the most fun I had throughout the entire game. In comparison to Spider-Man, he's got some of the same web zip and wall climbing abilities, but his combat feels much more fluid and satisfying, all thanks to his tentacle swing. Seriously, once I found out how powerful this thing was, I was mashing the Y button for every combat encounter. The tentacle's range reaches far enough that you can disrupt an enemy's attack, and you'll keep yourself safe from harm. On top of that, Venom can feed on opponents or civilians, which allows him to just regain any lost health. This makes him a highly survivable character in most scenarios. The only minor complaint I have is with Venom's high jump ability. Doing precise platforming is just really difficult with it. It seems to send me just too high up in the air that I lose track of where I am, but again, it's only a minor complaint. Once you're given all the basics of playing as Venom, you finish off by facing Wolverine in a bar fight smackdown. It's the first of many boss fights in the game, which I will warn you now, be prepared for lots of retries. Each boss fight in the game presents a very strong challenge, and when you begin, you can't select what difficulty to play on. The game tries to nudge you to what you're meant to do, but I remember it being very unclear at times. But if you have the patience to follow patterns and occasionally mix things up by throwing cars, for example, this isn't too big of an issue. Just as soon as Wolverine is dealt with, though, this happens. Yeah, that's it. The story missions themselves feel very disconnected from the rest of the game. Just when I was in the middle of having fun with Venom, I just completely lose control of him until the next chapter of the story he appears in. It's so jarring too. When this happened, I was very confused. Getting to the next story beat felt like a chore too, because I have to complete a certain number of time trials or save this many people, which in general I don't have much of a problem with making you complete events for the next part of the story. But improving Spider-Man's health or powers isn't tied to your completion of the side activities. You only get an upgrade when the game decides you get one. It would have been nice to feel like I was actually gaining improvements as I went along. Although I'm pretty confident this is just coming from my experience playing modern games. At the time of this game's release, I can't imagine these being primary complaints at all. It's just a very sudden and noticeable split between open city and missions. Plus, there's one moment in particular that doesn't even try to hide the glaring issue of the game's progression. In that same mission that I had a soft locking glitch in, I was led to a boss fight on a skyscraper. Again, after a very tough battle thanks to it being very easy to get knocked off and lose track of where he goes, the mission ends with this cutscene.
Hey, I know you get this all the time, but any of you see a big scary robot guy with a backpack? Latverian embassy? That's just great.
All the buildup of trying to unravel this part of the plot just comes to a halt because I need to complete a few more city events. Like seriously, the embassy is right there. So you have these moments that seem to just pad out for time when I'm sitting here just wanting to go back to playing Venom. There was one point where I thought in my mind that I just wanted this to be a Venom game. But in truth, it should have been split more evenly. With polishing up Venom's traversal methods, free roaming in the city would have been a lot of fun in between story missions. I tried my best to bypass some of the tedium by completing more trials than necessary to do the next mission, which worked out for me as most of the last missions occurred one after the other. But I also enjoyed this game a lot more just pacing it out. With the sudden spikes in difficulty, there came a lot of times when I got frustrated. So I'd suggest playing the game as casually as possible, spreading out your playtime so that maybe these missions and side objectives feel much less tedious. Though that's not to say I didn't enjoy myself in the open city. I actually began to notice all of these Nokia ads scattered throughout the city, which I found both strange and hilarious as a product placement in this game. Like, why, of all things, Nokia? There's even what looks to be a Nokia store right here. I mean, I can't help but think if Spider-Man had Nokia phones, he could just chuck those bricks at Venom and not even bother with the webs. I don't know, it was just an odd thing that seemed to stick out in the game. Huh. Depending on the way you pace yourself, the game's story can be repetitive in a gameplay sense. The actual content of the story is a bit scatterbrained with how many characters get involved for such a short time, but I can kinda see what it's going for. It mimics the comic style visually and narratively by placing higher focus on set pieces and interactions with different characters. If the concept art is anything to go off of, Thor, Captain America, and Iron Man look to have made an appearance at one point in the game's development. I definitely can't fault the game for this. It's meant to be fun, and it remains a very simple Spider-Man title. And when the story is complete, you finally unlock Venom entirely, which gives me everything I'd ever want with Venom gameplay in this game. I had even discovered a practically hidden way to play around in the open city while running around as Venom. So here's what you can do. Grab a car or find some civilians and begin to cause some chaos. While you do, police will begin to show up at your location. It starts off as a pretty trivial threat. Cops get spawned in a radius around you on rooftops and on the street, and you can continue attacking them. The more you defeat, you'll increase your score in the middle of the screen here. The longer it goes on, you'll be dealing with even more difficult threats, leading to actual SHIELD agents showing up and low-flying helicopters ready to gun you down. The game doesn't even tell you about this at all, which is something I absolutely love. It kind of feels like something stuck in there at the end of development, just because it was a fun thing to do, which doesn't sound too far off when considering the early years of Treyarch. Overall, I really like this game, and I can easily see why a lot of people have so much nostalgia and love for this game. The visual style is so vibrant and unique. Just look at the skyline and the clouds here. At the end of the day, you have a free-roam Spider-Man game that adores its own comic book roots, and I'm very proud to have it on my shelf. Thank you for watching, and take care. I hope to see you next time.